Welcome back, fellow warriors, to the stage of history. My name is Cosmo Jazz, and this is my reaction channel. Like I said, we're going to be doing back-to-back videos today, so this next one we're going to do is 6 Halloween Horror Stories Animated by Martin Animations. Now, you guys seem to be liking these a little bit, and I like this guy too. I was going to try a different kind of people, but I need to know more about like if they like people reacting to their stuff or whatnot. So next time we do kind of animated things, we might be seeing it from a different animator. But till then, this guy's pretty cool. So we're going to do this and check it out. And if you haven't seen the other video, like I was saying before, thank you for the people who have started subscribing already. Very much appreciated. If you do enjoy the content that you're seeing here, please hit the like button and subscribe. I'm trying to hit 100 subscribers by the end of the year, and if I could hit 50 subscribers by my birthday, which is the end of the month, then I would be greatly appreciative of you guys. And come on, dude. I love to have you. I love to make this place a place of discussion, as I always have a discussion pretty much near at the end of each video. So yeah, come on and join us. And yeah, let's get into this.
When I was 21, I lived with my 2 friends, Bruce and Ollie. We lived in a small house in a nice family-friendly neighborhood in the suburbs of our major city. Ollie owned the house and occupied the master bedroom on the main floor, and Bruce had the other bedroom on the main floor. My bedroom was on the mostly finished basement, which was great because I had a ton of privacy and a lot of open space. There was a side door that could be accessed from the basement, so I could come and go as I pleased without bothering the other roommates. We were all pretty close, but it was nice to feel like I had my own living space, even though there were 3 of us in the house. At the time, Bruce and I were huge fans of Halloween and the fall season in general.
I thought he had a cat tail for a
and
second.
having full-time jobs, it wasn't really ideal for us to go out and attend Halloween parties like a lot of the other people we knew. Also, Halloween fell on a Tuesday this year, so instead we decided to just watch some horror movies in my basement
it's my birthday,
bedroom,
so it's like
and
in
just
the middle of the week
relax.
and it's Halloween.
After we watched a couple of movies, we started to get a little bored. It was about 11 p.m. and the trick-or-treaters were home, and most people were in for the night. Knowing we had to work in the a.m., we decided it would be a good idea for us to go on a quick walk and call it a night. There is something about the air on Halloween night. It's like when you go on a vacation to Florida and the night breeze just feels and smells different. That's how it is on Halloween. It's nostalgic and can almost give you a euphoric feeling. Anyway, as we started to walk in the quiet and somewhat desolate neighborhood, we approached the park. Now we walk through this park all the time during the day, probably at least 50 times at this point. It was a little park right in the middle of the neighborhood. The park had a main entrance from one of the busier streets and a back entrance from the street we lived on. The back entrance was covered with a lot of trees and a very small wooded area. About 30 yards from the entrance, there were 3 baseball fields, a pavilion, and a basketball court.
Let's say, where's the hoop?
We walked into the back entrance where all the trees were, and it was nearly pitch black, but there was a low orange hue from the streetlight barely making its way through the trees. As we walked through the wooded area, we both stopped abruptly. We thought we saw a man standing at the end of the path. The figure was completely still, and it was so dark we couldn't be sure what it was. I called out, "Hey!" to the figure, but no response. I suggested we should turn around, but Bruce said we should check it out, which was unlike him because I was usually the braver of us two. As we got closer,
that should tell you right there, turn around.
There was a man standing there. The man was completely still and had both of his hands in his front hoodie pocket. His head was down facing the ground. Trying not to freak out, we decided to slowly back up and make our way to the street and our house without further confrontation. Before we even moved, we heard a noise next to us coming from both sides. Trying to focus our eyes in the darkness, we saw 2 more figures moving towards us in the woods.
Oh no, it's some kind of
Unlike
trap.
the other guy just standing there, these people were approaching us. I wish I could explain the feeling I felt inside me during this point.
About to
It's
start
like a sinking
into one of
pit in
them
your
Streets of
stomach when a
Rage
cop pulls up
games.
behind you with his lights on, but 100 times worse. fight or flight kicked in, and we turned and sprinted full speed out of that park
Smart.
and onto our street, never looking back to see if they were following us.
Should have
We
did that
ran right
beforehand,
to our
but
house
we
and
take
locked the doors
those.
behind us. While sitting in the basement,
Hope
we
y'all
had all
made
the
sure they
lights
didn't
off,
follow
and we
you.
were trying to look out the basement windows to see if we could see if anyone followed us or
Also, that looks kind of
possibly
funny.
saw the house we went into. We were so scared we didn't know what to do. Were we in real danger? Was it someone just playing a prank? After about half an hour or so, we decided that they most likely didn't follow us, and it was probably okay to go to sleep, especially considering we both had work in the morning. At about 2:30 in the morning, Bruce woke me up. He said he thought he heard something outside his bedroom window. I went to his room and looked out the window, and I could see a pumpkin laying in our backyard. This was concerning because we didn't have any pumpkins outside our house. We didn't set any up for decorations or anything like that. For the second time tonight, we were terrified and decided to go into the living room. While in the living room, we made sure we had the house lights off and began looking out the front windows.
Why?
Within the first minute of looking, there they were. 3 men standing in the middle
Call
of
the
the road
cops.
just staring at our house. We thought about calling the police, but what were we going to tell them? There are three
That there are
guys,
three
not staying on
guys
our
that literally
property
put a
who
pumpkin
may
on your
or may not have thrown a pumpkin in our
on your
backyard. We just
they
sat
clearly
in the living
did.
room
Come
for
on,
about
guys.
10 minutes trying to think of something, anything we could do. We made sure the front door was locked and grabbed a baseball bat and I think a kitchen knife. We looked out the window again and the 3 men
At
were
least
gone.
let them know.
Nothing but the illumination from the streetlights. For the rest of the night, we stayed in the living room watching SportsCenter until we eventually dozed off. Morning finally came. As we got ready for work, we just agreed it was probably just a Halloween prank and we should move on and forget about it. However, when I got to my car, there was a note on my windshield that said, "Happy Halloween," with a smiling face sticker on it. What I read next gave me the same feeling I had just had a few hours before when I thought we were in real danger. At the bottom on the paper it said, "P.S. Good thing you lock your doors." What would these people have done if the doors were unlocked? Bruce and I both decided to call in from work and stay home that day. Nothing else of note happened regarding this incident, but it's just a reminder that it doesn't matter how quiet and nice a neighborhood you think you live in. On Halloween, anything can happen.
Yeah, y'all better be glad they didn't get like real crazy and start busting through your windows and shit. Because that could have been real bad.
As we slowly enter the fall season, I'd like to share a story with you that happened to me a few years ago.
Yeah, neat jack-o'-lantern.
I have mentioned this story to some of
drawings.
my close personal friends and family, many of which don't believe me.
Oh yeah, that is
and
a
that's
spider
fine.
web.
They probably think I'm just joking around or trying to scare them, but I know I experienced something that night, and I wish I had a better explanation for it. At the time these events took place, I lived on a quiet street a little outside the city, but not quite into the suburbs. My street had a big rundown house at the very end of the block that was across from an unused parking lot and an out-of-business bar. The person who inhabited the house before it
tall
became
guy.
dilapidated was Mrs. Morgan. Mrs. Morgan was an old curmudgeon in every sense of the word. Every time my friends and I would walk by the house, she would yell at us and make some
Why are your
insanely
friends
random
dark?
comment like we were trampling her garden or using her garbage to play hide-and-seek or some other incoherent nonsense that wasn't true. Even though my friends and I did get into some adolescence trouble around the neighborhood, we never did anything to Mrs. Morgan. Our parents always told us that we should try and be nice. I mean, she was a widow and had no children, so it must have been a pretty lonely life.
See, I'm already sus
Rewind
of
about
this
3 years ago,
because
and
one of my
Mrs.
favorite
Morgan
books, Pen
unfortunately
Pal,
passes away,
is
and the house
kind of
becomes
centered
abandoned
around this in
and
one of
I
the
believe
chapters.
eventually condemned.
And what happens in
At
that
least there were
chapter?
signs on the boarded windows and doors, but I never got close enough to read what they said. Needless to say, it became an eyesore for the community in what was a pretty quiet and uneventful street. My girlfriend at the time only lived a couple of blocks, and I would usually walk to and from her house when we hung out. It was literally a 4-minute walk tops, so it was no big deal. I would pass Mrs. Morgan's abandoned house and the empty parking lot with the out-of-business bar every time I walked to and from her house. Now fast forward to a few years ago, the last time I ever made that walk. It was about 3 a.m. on Halloween night, I guess technically November 1st, and I was walking home from my girlfriend's house. I was supposed to be home way earlier in the night, but we both fell asleep watching scary movies and pigging out on the extra candy her parents didn't hand out. As I made it to my street and started my walk past Mrs. Morgan's house, I heard a noise. I stopped for a minute to make sure it wasn't a skunk because for some odd reason that's the first thing that popped in my mind when I heard the noise. I slowed down a little bit and looked at the house as I proceeded cautiously. That's when I noticed the front door that was usually boarded up and had a sign posted on it was now open. I tried to rationalize why the door was now open, saying to myself it was probably the wind, but then again, it was a beautiful, calm night. I then paused in front of the house and looked directly at the front door, and that's when I saw her, Mrs. Morgan, right there, staring back at me. I knew for sure it was her. But how? She had passed away and the house was clearly unlivable for anyone else. At this point, I was so scared that I just shouted something out. I don't even remember if it was words or just noises. The figure stepped onto the front porch and continued to stare at me.
Why is she
normal?
I
broke my stare and just started running back to my house, turning back every now and then to see if she was still staring at me or perhaps following me. I made it back to my house probably 30 seconds later and opened the side door and went down to my room. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I'm not sure if I was overtired or just had scary things in my subconscious with it being Halloween and watching movies all night, but I know I saw Mrs. Morgan standing there only a couple of feet away from me. Whether it was a true paranormal encounter or something that my mind made me think I saw, I won't ever know for sure.
Yeah, why is she like freaky there?
They always say that
and then she comes out, she's all normal.
And the dead is at its thinnest on Halloween, and now I actually believe it.
It's fucking weird.
Alright, so you guys might not find this creepy or scary enough, but I thought it was worth sharing. This is something that I experienced when I was a kid, probably between the ages of 10 to 14. Our Halloween tradition was that my parents and I would meet up with my godparents and their son and go trick-or-treating around our neighborhood. This has been a tradition with my older siblings as well, so it's fair to say this tradition has started even before I was born. Anyway, we follow the same route every year, the highlight being stopping at the local funeral home that was only about 3 blocks from my house. The funeral home had a big party in their parking lot every Halloween.
Or maybe it's
They provided cotton candy, candy apples, donuts, cider, popcorn, balloons, and probably even more, all free. If you wanted a balloon, which every kid did, you had to shake the hand of the person in the full-on movie set quality gorilla suit. I hated doing it because the gorilla shook your hand so hard I borderline thought my hand was going to break. So every year it was the same thing. If you wanted a balloon, you had to shake his hand. I developed kind of an anxiety as it related to the gorilla, so I would just grab the snacks to avoid the person in the gorilla costume. Also, I was getting older and I really didn't care about balloons. But it seemed as though the gorilla would follow me around and put a balloon out in his right hand, like he wanted me to take it. I tried my best just to avoid it and hurry my parents on so we could continue trick-or-treating. They thought it was the funniest thing that I was scared of the gorilla. I really don't think I was. I think I just thought it was weird that a grown man dressed in a costume would shatter kids' hands in order to give them a balloon.
Point taken.
So this story revolves around one Halloween, where we followed the same routine as previously mentioned. I ignored the person in the gorilla costume when it came to that part of the night and had a pretty uneventful night trick-or-treating. I remember I was still at the age where I had a bedtime and my parents had to check my candy. Yes, they were those parents. I was still impressionable enough that horror movies scared the crap out of me and I couldn't even watch them because then I couldn't sleep with the lights off. For whatever reason that night I felt particularly uneasy and scared. I had avoided scary movies so I could get a good night's sleep, but for some reason I was unsettled. I ended up sleeping on the floor with my chocolate lab and my dad passed out on the couch, which gave me some sense of relief. I got up in the middle of the night to let my dog out. I knew she had to go out because she was pacing back and forth. She was quick and came right back in, but on the way back to the living room I saw something in the street. It was a figure that seemed to be just standing there. I crept up to the window on my knees to get a better look so I couldn't be seen. I swear to God it was that gorilla holding the balloons, literally standing right outside my house. I didn't know what to do. I was scared, but more scared that this person was going to approach my house. I woke up my dad, who was snoring so loud I was surprised the neighbors weren't awake. I told him there was someone outside, and he got up immediately and opened the front door, but there was no one in the street. No one around at all, at least that he could see. I told him what I thought I saw, and he said it was probably just a bad dream or my imagination. We turned the TV on in the living room for a while because I think he could tell I was unsettled and was having trouble trying to fall back asleep. I can sit here today writing this and honestly tell you, I don't know what happened. I never had any other episodes where I thought I saw
like
something that
or
wasn't there. I don't sleepwalk. I don't often have nightmares. I don't know how to explain what I saw. It was a long time ago, and now I'm an adult who takes his own niece and nephew trick-or-treating. But every time around fall, I always think about this experience and try to come to a logical conclusion to explain what happened. I still can't figure it out, and probably never will. I wonder if that funeral home is still open, and if the guy in the gorilla costume is still there.
I mean, to be honest, that is very weird that the person in the gorilla costume is a normal thing at a funeral
The
home.
events of the story took place when I was 18 and in my senior year
It could
of high
be in
school.
his head still.
I'm 27 now, and
Especially
still
with all
have
that
horrible
jiggling in his
flashbacks
head, like,
from that Halloween night. My friends and I liked to party in high school, and Halloween was obviously one of the best nights to go out and party.
Ooh, ladies.
We got to dress up in sexy outfits and have an excuse to act a little crazy. My friends usually drew all the attention from the guys we went to school with. I was still friends with all the boys, but none of them really ever showed any interest outside of friendship. Anyway, on this particular Halloween, we had a party at my friend Steve's house. Like a lot of high school parties, no one knew how to handle their alcohol. At about 11, the cops had already been called for a noise complaint. The party scattered, and everyone ran as to not get detained or get their information taken by police.
Okay, lights
My friend
kind of
Amy,
black.
who was getting into a car with her boyfriend,
Sorry
told
for
me to
that,
jump
that
into
hurt
the car
anybody's
with her
eyes.
friend Dave, and he would take us to another party, which I begrudgingly decided to do. The car ride was weird. Just him and I, who didn't know each other and didn't really have much to say. Awkward.
This guy's kind of...
The car smelled like
creepy.
Slim Jims and body odor and looked rather messy. Dave had a mask, which was on his lap while he was driving. He had a hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans, and brown work boots on to complete the costume. He also had a scraggly beard and greasy hair. I tried asking questions to make the drive less awkward, but he didn't really answer them and didn't seem interested in holding a conversation. Finally, I asked what school he went to, and he responded, "I dropped out of college a year ago." So I asked, "Well, how old are you?" He responded in a shaky, almost nervous voice, I'm 25. This freaked me out a little bit because he was older than me and he just dropped out of college at the age of 25. Also, he was 25 and was just leaving a high school party. Trying not to let him in on the fact that I was kind of nervous, I asked, "So, how do you know Amy?" And he responded in his shaky and unflattering voice. He said, Who's Amy?" I sunk into my seat, pinching my sides, not knowing what to do. "She's the blonde who told me to get in the car with you." He responded with a very stoic, "Oh, her? Yeah. She told me you were single." I didn't respond. I honestly didn't know what to say. Did this guy really not know Amy? Or was he just
your
tipsy
fight
and
or flight
confused?
needs to
I
kick
texted
in
Amy as we
heavy
were driving
hard
to
right
tell her
now.
how angry I was, but she didn't answer. About 10 or 15 minutes in the car, which seemed like forever, we arrived at a house. It didn't seem to be a very nice part of town, or at least an area I was accustomed to going to parties. I looked for Amy's car, or any car I recognized, but it was just too dark to point anything out. We approached a red door with chipped paint lit up only by a dull front light. Dave didn't even knock and just walked into the house, so I followed him, hoping to see a familiar face.
Are you serious?
The house was cold and smelled awful. We walked into the front room, which I assumed would be the living room. It was dirty and had an olive green shag carpet with an old brown couch. The walls were white with chipped paint and stains everywhere.
This girl's
Piles
fight or
of pizza
flight
boxes
is like
and beer cans lined the floors.
non-existent.
The room was only lit by one lamp that was on the floor, and it gave off a very low light. On the brown couch there was a man and woman sitting very close together, but not really moving. They looked to be passed out, or maybe just drunk. We walked into the kitchen, which was just more of the same. Trash and that horrid smell of garbage. In the kitchen there was a man probably in his 20s who looked like he may have been using. He gave Dave a high five and introduced himself to me as Skip. He looked at Dave and back at me and smiled. His yellow teeth and bug eyes made my skin crawl.
Got
The
that
other man
fuckboy
in the
look.
kitchen was an older gentleman, maybe in his 40s
Another
or
fuckboy
50s.
look.
I couldn't tell. He said nothing and just looked at me. I felt sick to my stomach, and the only reason why I didn't run out of this place was because I had no clue where I was, and had no clue if these people were capable of anything dangerous. Again, I texted Amy with no answer, deciding to not call as my phone only had 5% battery. Dave escorted
this is
me
a
into the
terrible
back room, which
situation.
was kind of like a screened-in porch. I felt a brief moment of relief seeing about 6 or 7 people out there. There were only 2 girls out of the bunch, and they were half naked and looked like they weighed a maximum of 90 pounds. I could feel everybody staring at me, but at least there was a group of people and I wasn't secluded or alone with this Dave. I know it sounds crazy,
That
but I
doesn't
felt
sound
almost safe being around this larger crowd. But this temporary relief faded very quickly when the 2 girls left with all the guys who had been on the porch. They re-entered the house and disappeared out of sight. As I sat in this screened-in room trying to think of my options, Dave finally spoke up and said, "I think you're really cute." I said thanks and kind of shrugged it off.
Biting
He
of
got
lip
up and
is
started to
killing
rub
me.
my back and began breathing very heavily. After about 5 minutes, the most unpleasant back rub I had ever had, he stepped in front of me and asked if I wanted to go somewhere more private. I said to him in a terrified, cracking voice,
Fuck no.
I'm sorry, but I'm not that kind of girl." I could see the displeasure and anger in his face, and I could feel the tears coming. Then nothing short of a miracle happened. One of the girls who went inside just a minute before began to scream erratically, swearing and yelling at everyone in the room. Dave ran upstairs, leaving me downstairs in the back room alone, and without even thinking twice, I got up and climbed out the window and
And I
ran.
wonder if she was looking at
didn't
her
care
like,
that I didn't
I
know
know
where
what
I
he's
was.
going to do.
I
I
wasn't
need
going
to do
stop
something.
until I was to a gas station or a 7-Eleven or something. I was running down the street, staying close to the sidewalk, trying not to bring any attention to myself. After what seemed like a few minutes, I luckily approached a 24-hour Walmart. I walked in and had the night manager call my parents as my cell phone was now dead. It was about 30 minutes from my house and my parents were on their way. Just as I thought I could relax and try to put these horrifying events behind me, Dave and his friend Skip walked into the Walmart. They didn't see me, but I couldn't believe that they were in the same store. They were looking
it
around
wasn't that far
like they were
away.
looking for something or someone.
Probably
Was it
you.
me, or was I being paranoid? The next day, Amy called me and apologized all day, crying and asking what she could do to make it up to me. I got some solace that she confirmed the person I got into the car with was actually Dave and not some random guy, but was still left traumatized thinking about what could have happened.
But you,
It's been
she didn't
almost
even
10
know
years
that
since
guy
that
really.
night, and I know it could have been a lot worse.
Like, fuck
And I'm
you.
lucky
You're
that I
not
was
a
able to
friend at
leave
all.
with no physical harm, but still wouldn't wish the experience I had that night on my worst enemy. I haven't seen Dave, Skip, or any of the people I saw that night, and hope I never do.
Like,
Again.
I know it's probably head candy as fuck, but I do think the other girl saw where things were going, and like, I have to do
And I have
something.
only shared this story with a few people up to this point. I trusted a few close friends who I thought would believe me, but that's about
Maybe
it.
she was in the same situation.
I can remember
and
the
wished
events of this
somebody did
specific
something
night
for her.
vividly. My parents own a camp on a local lake about 25 minutes from my hometown. It's pretty awesome to go there, bring friends, and basically do what we want. My friends and I would usually throw smaller parties out there all summer long.
It's the guys in
There
black.
was always activity on the lake, but nothing that really ever raised any alarms. We kind of just chalked it up to either boats, wind, or animals if we thought we saw something in the lake after it got dark. One Halloween night, I decided it would be a good idea to skip the Halloween party that was taking place in town and bring my boyfriend back to the camp house for the night so we could be alone. My parents thought I would be at said Halloween party and would be spending the night at a friend's house. We arrived at the camp pretty late, around 9 or 10 p.m. One thing I remember about the camp is how dark it was, void of any street lights and usually only illuminated by the stars in the sky. My boyfriend and I stayed up for a couple of hours talking, eating, and I think we played a board game or something like that. I would guess we fell asleep at some point after midnight. After about an hour or so of sleeping, I woke up suddenly to what seemed to be a loud blast, like a gunshot, but distorted somehow. I just remember it being so loud that I couldn't even remember where I was when I woke up. I looked over the couch and my boyfriend was somehow still asleep. I got up and looked out the back door window, which had a view of the lake. I saw something that looked like a light, or a ball of light over the lake. I stared at the floating light in confusion, trying to figure out what it was. Was it a flashlight or something glowing from under the water? Without really thinking, I slipped on my flip-flops and I went outside and approached the shore, still staring at the light, squinting my eyes trying to make out what it was. It was an orange-colored light, maybe 75 feet out into the lake and what seemed to be floating a couple of feet off the top of the water. After about 2 minutes of continued staring and squinting, the orange color changed to a bright purple, and several white specks of light came out of the purple glow and hovered all around the glowing orb.
What the fuck?
As I started to freak out as to what this could be, I was forced to my knees by the loud blasting noise I heard earlier. I started to plug my ears, collect myself, and turn back to the house to grab my boyfriend. I saw a huge flash, and the next thing I remember was waking up in an Adirondack chair on my neighbor's yard the next morning. My flip-flops that I wore outside to get a closer look at the lake were gone. I had no idea how to explain the events of the night, and long story short, I went to the doctor, and after seeing neurological specialists, they don't show any sign that I could have had an episode. I've been told that it was most likely a vivid nightmare, and that I was sleepwalking and that's how I ended up on my neighbor's porch. Also, that would explain why my boyfriend never woke up. However, I believe this night I saw something otherworldly. I don't believe in the paranormal, and until this point,
she saw an
I didn't
SCP.
believe in the extraterrestrial. But this didn't feel like a nightmare. It felt real. I can still see the images and hear the noises from that night. I know many of you may not believe my story, and that's fine.
Mitochondria,
but
the
I feel like I
powerhouse
wanted to
of the
share the experience I
cell.
had that night. I'm no longer with that boyfriend, and even though he was concerned for my well-being, especially immediately after the events, I don't think he really believed my story either. Needless to say, I spend less time at the camp and am reminded of this night every year around this time, when Halloween decorations start popping up in the stores.
Interesting story.
I grew up in rural Iowa, the kind of place where it's just cornfields for miles and miles around. It was a pretty terrible place to grow up. Like, it'll always be home to me, and I'll always have a fair amount of affection for it. Home is where the heart is, and all that nonsense, but even from the earliest age I can remember, I couldn't wait to leave. Like, put it this way, Halloween has always been my favorite holiday. But unlike the kids who trick-or-treat over in Cedar Rapids or Waterloo, who had actual neighborhoods to harvest whole sacks of candy from, we'd have to walk like a mile and a half at a time just to make it to the next house. So aside from the one year where our mom drove us over to Dyersville so we could actually get a taste of how those city kids lived, trick-or-treating just wasn't really an option for us. So a little backstory here.
I know how that feels.
The last year we were allowed to go trick-or-treating, our immediate neighbor to the east, who lived like 3 miles away, basically told us to buzz off because we were getting way too big to be playing kids' games. This guy has begrudgingly given us a few apples some years, and we always sort of resented him for it. But that year, when he told us where to go, it made us downright hate him. I mean, for the entirety of the next year, me and my brother would scowl whenever my dad drove us past his house. To us,
understandable,
he ruined
for
the
kids.
one good thing we got to do around Halloween each year. I know we were just dumb kids, but Kids are also cruel and stubborn on occasion, and
Exactly.
I guess we were just that kind of kid. So the next year, my mom decides to take us over to Living History Farms over in Urbandale. Living History Farms is this place over near Des Moines that bills itself as interactive outdoor museum which teaches people about Midwestern rural life experiences.
That sounds
Obviously, we
boring.
weren't thrilled about the visit. It wasn't exactly exciting for two boys in their early teens. I mean, learning about some of the origins of Halloween was pretty cool. I mean, a kid like me was all about hearing how Halloween was the night when spirits of the dead returned to Earth to wreak havoc on those that had wronged them in life. However, there was one particular little educational tidbit that got me and my brother's attention, and that was the stories of how our Iowan ancestors used Halloween as a night to play all kinds of pranks on each other. Pulling up cabbages and shrubs out of the garden was a common trick. Wagons were pushed into the lane or the street, or if the kids were feeling ambitious, they'd hoist the cars up on top of the victim's barn roof. But the most common mischief was taking your neighbor's garden or barnyard gates off the hinges and leaving it in someone else's yard. I remember the teacher lady telling us this, then me and my brother just looking at each other with this wordless kind of communication like, oh, the neighbor is going to get it this year.
Mess him up.
So that year, we snuck out of the house in the early hours of the morning, walked down to the neighbor's place with a screwdriver and hammer, and then did exactly that.
Dang.
We took his front gate off the hinges, walked it like a mile down the road to his other neighbor's place, then left it in the front yard. We did stuff like that for the next couple of years, each time getting progressively more bold, screwing with him harder and harder until it got to the point that we struggled to top the previous year's prank. Like it got to the point where we stole a huge section of his white picket fence and just threw it into the cornfield across the highway.
Dang.
I mean, we put some actual work into that, dismantling it piece by piece so as not to make too much noise and wake the guy. I mean, it sucked that we never got to hang around to see his reaction, but I guess imagining him going outside in the morning and going insane with rage was enough to keep us amused. So this one year, we rocked up to his house in the middle of the night and saw something we'd never expected to see in a million years. The neighbor guy obviously hated Halloween and never ever put up any decorations or anything. But that year, we turned up to see this Grim Reaper figure on his porch. It wasn't just some dumb-looking scarecrow type thing either. It seemed like the guy had put in a lot of work getting hold of an actual mannequin of something, as well as all this spooky-looking black robe stuff to dress it in. But since he was a farmer, he didn't have much trouble getting hold of the old rusty scythe that was leaning up against it. I mean, yeah, it was kind of intimidating. He'd obviously only put it there to try to scare us off. But we weren't about to be put off from our little year ritual at this point. Nothing short of a tornado could deter us from getting our revenge for having been so mean to us that Halloween night. But right as we started to dismantle his fence in almost absolute silence, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Or rather, I noticed the lack of something.
Okay, so it's
subtle
gone.
that
So
it actually takes
out.
me a minute to realize what I wasn't looking at. At some point, as we were taking his fence apart, the Grim Reaper statue thing had just up and disappeared. I stopped what I'm doing, looking around the front yard and trying to spot where it could have gone. I whisper over to my brother like, "The Reaper's gone. Did you see it move?" And at first he looked at me like I'm crazy.
No!
But then he too starts getting pretty freaked out. We're just crouched down, tools in hand, in the dead silence of the night, realizing that we'd been a little bit overconfident in our yearly pranks. I mean, we didn't quite realize what was happening at the time, only that things were about to go horribly wrong for us. "Let's get out of here," my brother whispered, and we immediately get up and start sort of jogging back towards the highway.
Makes
Then,
sense.
out of nowhere, the Grim Reaper is just standing there in front of us, with that big old rusty scythe in his hand, blocking our escape. It hadn't been a mannequin that was set up on the neighbor guy's porch. It was actually him. He dressed up like some dumb decoration and just stood there, still as a statue, waiting for the pranksters to arrive.
Okay.
There was like one drawn-out moment where we just sort of locked eyes with the guy who had taken down the hood of the black robes he was wearing, and then we just bolted. But since he was blocking the way to the road out front, we had to run back through his property, climbing over a fence and into a cornfield to get away from him. He was really fast for an older guy too. Like maybe it was just all that anger from having been victimized year after year, but somehow he wasn't weighed down by that scythe.
At that point,
for some reason he opted to keep on.
Because it's like, okay, you had your fun your 1 year, but now you're going to just keep doing it over and over again.
We'd be able to get away, but
and then he probably has to get somebody to like put that shit back.
Well, jumping
and explain
down the
why
other
my
side
shit's
didn't
all
go
over
too
the
well
place.
for me, and I badly sprained my ankle when I landed. That was when I really got terrified. When I realized I couldn't actually get away from the guy. My brother just kept running, and I wanted to shout after him to help me, but I knew the shout would give away my position to the guy, so I just kept my mouth shut. So picture the scene. I'm hiding out in the cornfield, so scared that I'm actually covering my mouth to keep from breathing too heavy, while this furious, scythe-armed guy is stalking up and down the rows looking for me.
Jeez.
So every so often, I had to just sort of limp to a hiding spot further away from him, trying my best not to rustle any of the stalks so I wouldn't betray my hiding spot. I mean, thank God it was the middle of the night, and maybe the guy's eyesight or hearing was just failing him in general, but I managed not to get myself caught. I just kept on stumbling further and further away until he just gave up and headed back to his house. But Jesus Christ, it was completely and utterly terrifying, hearing him say all this stuff like, "I'm gonna cut you up into little pieces and feed you to my pigs." Like the voice of his was telling me he meant every word of what he said. So yeah, as you can imagine, I was pretty close to peeing my pants.
But if you start pushing people too far,
I just couldn't get away fast enough.
I'm not surprised.
Needless to say, we didn't try any more pranks on that guy after that.
As you shouldn't.
I made up some excuse to my parents as to how I'd hurt my ankle and then just used it as an excuse to stay home until it had healed, given that I was super paranoid about the neighbor guy figuring out who exactly had been victimizing him year after year. But yeah, that's my story. I know it's probably not the scariest thing you'd ever heard, and I know that we kind of deserve what we got in the end.
I'm not gonna hold you. You definitely got what y'all deserved in the end. Like the first time, okay, you're just being dumb kids. But after years of doing that, like, come on. The guy's gonna be pissed as hell. I would be pissed as hell because, like, if I'm that old, I'm not gonna be able to probably put that all back together by myself. Or maybe I couldn't even find the pieces, and now I have to pay somebody to build an entire thing again that keeps getting dismantled every year, and I can't seem to stop it. Like, yeah, I'm gonna be pissed like that. I don't know if I'm gonna kill nobody, let's be honest here, but I'd be hella pissed, that's for sure. But yeah, alright, W compilation of things. And that was by Let's Read that was doing the narrating, so that was pretty cool. Martin Animations, boink, another win, as I'd always say. But let me know what you guys would do in these situations, especially that one with the girl, because she was in a very effed up situation. It's like being in that car. Now, I do think that maybe some of that survival instinct should have kicked in the second she left the car and saw the house, but hey. That's just me. And thank you guys for watching. If you hit the like, if you like what you saw, wow, I am everywhere tonight. Please hit the like button, subscribe, and share. And as always, ask yourself this one question: does your soul still burn? Bye, guys. Have a blessed day. Money and the city that I'm from. I'll stay until I feel it.